going to sound strange, but startups are a noble calling. They really are. Like we bring new ideas into the world. If we're lucky, we change the world a little bit, create jobs for people. If we're really lucky, our startup actually survives and thrives and grows a little bit. And so I want to talk a little bit about ways to do that, paths, because it takes time. I mean, we're gonna talk about it, but these things take a long time. I'm a books person, so there's going to be book anecdotes scattered in here. So before I start, Somerset Maugham wrote this book called Of Human Bodies, which is a classic book. He had a really great saying. There's 3 rules for writing novels. Unfortunately, nobody knows what they are. So I'm going to tell you about my rules, but they're not everybody's rules, and I'm sure some of them are wrong. I just don't know which ones. And so before I dive into sort of all the paths that are available, I just want to talk a little bit about my path, not to brag or anything about me, but just because I think there's some things to take away from it. Back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, I actually married somebody from Kailua, so that sort of was, I was actually born here. That was the beginning of my path to Hawaii, but then married someone from Kailua and moved back around 4 or 5 years ago. But I started in math. I took a job building a 3D modeling system. I spent 10 years at it. I mean, the people who I work with are part of my family now, and we ended up getting acquired for what now seems like not very much money, but that took me to Massachusetts, which is where I've been for the last 15 or 20 years, and so I worked for the acquirer for what I call 35 dog years. It was 5 years, but they were 5 really ugly years. From there, the people that I worked with were on the board of this interesting startup that I joined. Endeca was a search engine company, and so I was there for about 7 years. That company, a couple of years after I left, was acquired for an extremely large amount of money, which is pretty cool. Sort of from a monetary perspective, kind of a high point for me. But I had kind of an aha moment, and it didn't come until I was in my 40s, which is kind of a late time in life to figure things out. But I figured out that I didn't really like big companies. So this PTC company was about, 2,000 or 3,000 people at the time I was there. Endeca, when I left, was 500 people, big company, couldn't know everybody, and I realized that I didn't really like running big organizations and not creating things. I figured out that I like small and I like creating things, and that was what made me happy. And so I started a company. Can't really see the logo down here, but a cute little fish. And we ended up running it for about 7 years. I took $7.5 million in venture capital, sold the company for $2 million, and those of you with advanced math degrees can figure out that means that I actually sold the company for less than my investors invested in it. So not really the outcome you want with venture capital. But both of those companies they're people I'm still very good friends with. So one of my investors was Flybridge that I'm an advisor to now. So it is possible to fail, and to fail well. If you learn and you're transparent and you take away from those learnings, it's not like, they cross the other side of the street when I come by, right? We still have good relationships. So from a financial perspective, it wasn't a success, but I learned an amazing amount. So now I'm working on this social reading app. It's like a virtual book club app. It's a personal passion project, but I do want it to make money. I mean, that's one of the ways of figuring out if your product is working. If you're not making any money, you might not be building the right product. And so it's not the end goal, but it's a way of sort of understanding whether or not things are working. So just in terms of a few takeaways that might be helpful for you, there are a lot of different ways to do this. So my first job, like I said, it was a corporate innovation group. It was inside a big company, but we were basically a startup inside a startup, and that's a path you can take if you work for a kind of company that has that. I mean, Steve, I feel like you kind of experienced a little bit of that yourself, but that is a path that's available. You can go the classic VC route. You can bootstrap. We're going to talk about all of those, but the law every time is going to take time. It's going to be 10 years of your life. If you're going to be successful at this, you can fail really quickly, but if you want to be successful, it's going to be 10 years of your life. So I'll say this again later, but let me encourage you, work on something that is worth spending 10 years of your life on. And the thing that I think, we can go back for a minute, I can draw a line through every one of these jobs and tell you exactly who I met, exactly what I learned that took me to the next job. And there's one of those everywhere. I met in school, I met the person who started this. When I was there, there. I met the person who ended up being my mentor and bringing me into this company. I worked really closely with the person who ended up on the board of that company. And you can draw a line through it. So when you're in something, when you're thinking about, should I get into something, is there somebody I can learn from there? And on the flip side, is there something I can give back there? You know, are there people that I can teach? And if both of those are true, then you're in balance in that opportunity. So if you look at this later online, these are links to things I've written. If you're curious, you can go read them. But I like to say every opportunity you're in prepares you for the next one, because usually your success doesn't come from the thing you're in. It comes from the thing you were in before. Or alternatively, what you're doing now is preparing you for what comes next. And so I think that's a really important way to think about what you're doing. Am I learning? Am I growing? And lastly, I said it again, it's like figure out something that means something to you and work on that. Like life's too short to work on things you don't like, that don't mean anything. So that's enough about me. I want to sort of transition over to you, and we're going to go through a lot of different details, but there's like 3 or 4 basic questions you ought to understand about what you're doing. Like, what problem are you solving? If you run into me in the street, you know, they call it the elevator pitch, right? You should be able to, in 2 or 3 sentences, what problem are you solving? I'm solving rapid OV death, right? Very straightforward. How are you solving it? Are there other people trying to solve this? Is what you're doing unique? If there's other people doing this and your solution isn't unique, you're going to struggle. Doesn't mean don't do it, but at least understand that. Who are you solving it for? How many people have this problem you're trying to solve? If there's 5 people in the world with the problem you're solving and they'll each pay $10, then you're going to run out of money fairly quickly. So you want to be thinking about who are these people, how many of them are there, all the motivators for why will they want your solution. And that's going to take us to a market sizing question we'll talk about in a little bit. But again, I want to come back to this. You're going to spend 10 years of your life on this. Make sure it's something that matters. Life's too short to work on things that don't matter. So we're going to talk about kind of what I call the pillars of sustainability, sort of the 3 things that you need to sort out to have a sustainable business. And when I say business, that can mean nonprofit, that can mean a social enterprise, that can mean for-profit. They're all valuable. I'm just going to say business is shorthand for, you know, an activity that involves taking a product to market. We're going to talk a lot about product market fit, because that's the basis for everything. If you want to raise venture capital, you need product market fit. If you don't want to raise venture capital, you need product market fit. Like, you're going to need that no matter what. And we're going to talk about what I mean by that. You need a path to profitability, and again, I'll say profitability in a conceptual sense. Even if you're running a nonprofit, if you're not generating money to support yourself, whether that be through grants or through product revenue, you're going to run out of steam and you're going to fail. So like you gotta survive in order to change the world. So we're going to talk about that, and the last thing we're going to talk about is emotional resilience, and that's kind of an odd word, but if you're going to spend 10 years of your life, 5 of those years are going to suck. 10 of those years are probably going to suck. It's hard work when you start up, so you need to have a grounding that will take you through all of that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Any Game of Thrones fans? Yeah, I'm currently in a Game of Thrones frenzy like everybody. So product market fit, do you solve a real need for a real market? If you got these White Walkers coming after you, you have a real need for dragon glass weapons, which is the only thing that's killed you. So that's an example of a real need in a real market. So if you've got a product that's out there, if you can demonstrate that your product is working, if it's solving a problem for someone, and you've got an identifiable market, then you've got product market fit. You've got a product that solves a real need for real people. And that's the basis for everything. If you don't have that, that's step 0. You can't proceed to step 1 until you have that. And it's common, and I fall prey to this myself, to believe that you have product market fit. I know I have a product that's great for book clubs because I believe it and I use it for that. That's not evidence, that's belief. So when you go to raise money, when you go to talk to people, they're going to want evidence. What data do you have that supports that? I don't want to call it the worst way because it's a good way, but the least best way is to ask your friends and family, and that's where everybody starts, right? Hey, if I had this, would you use it? And if your friends and family love you, they will lie to you because they don't want to hurt your feelings. In fact, even people who don't know you will lie to you because they don't want to hurt your feelings. So the least best way is to ask your friends and family, but that's a great place to start. A little bit better is to talk to people who are disinterested somehow, a little more likely to sort of not want to hurt your feelings by telling you they don't like your idea. So I call that disinterested people. You know, in the the case of Dragon Glass, you know, if you can talk to some of the people who've taken the black and who are fighting White Walkers, they're going to be a little bit more disinterested and sort of tell you. Even better is if you've got metrics, like if you're selling products, if people are using, even if you're not selling products, if people are using your product, that's data. So my product, for example, it's free. So it's not quite free, but so I make a little bit of revenue, but more important to me is the data, watching what people do, is it working, do they stay with it or do they abandon it? So metrics are great. And the best is if you can get people to pay for the product, then you know you've got product market fit for some kind of product. But you know, they say startups are a search for a business model. I think startups are really a search for product market fit. Do I have a product that solves this real need? If you get to that place, then you want to be thinking about how big is your market. And how big your market is going to impact these paths that we're talking about. Do I go venture capital? Do I go social enterprise? Do I do bootstrap? That's going to be determined a lot by how big your potential market is. So how big is the market for Dragon Glass weapons? There's sort of two ways that people typically do market sizing. One is sort of top down. You start with some big number that's known, usually from some authority. So the Society for Creative Anachronism says, you know, 10 billion gold dragons get spent on weapons every year, and I get X% of that. So that's my sort of top down market sizing. So that's one way of doing it. Another way to do it is to figure out how many people are in book clubs every year. You know, and sort of reason from how many people have a need, and then building up with, well, what do I think they'll pay, and sort of building up from the bottom. And if you're lucky and you do this, you know, I got 1 billion gold dragons, here I got 500 million gold dragons. Those are essentially the same, right? I mean, you know, to an order of magnitude, they're about the same. So that if you do that math, you might give yourself confidence that you kind of got the right number. This market size is really important because if your market size is below $1 billion, for example, you're going to really not be able to raise venture capital. And it's a complicated equation, but the long and short of it is if the market isn't big enough, venture capital is probably not going to be the route for you. And we'll talk about that. And that's okay. That's totally okay. It just means you want to think about which path you're on. And so here I think of sort of three sort of common paths. There's the venture capital path. I'm going to talk about each of these. You know, the A&D path, I'm going to pay for this out of my pocket. I'm going to take out credit card debt. I'm going to try to get a loan, whatever it may be, but not going sort of the traditional venture route. And then lastly, there's sort of a variation of venture called social venture we'll talk about, which is if you're in a social enterprise where you're not only concerned about profit, but you're concerned about social impact, that opens up some other paths for you. Incubators and accelerators are, I kind of put them over here with venture capital. It doesn't have to be. I mean, you're in one right now. But these are interesting ways, especially for first-time entrepreneurs, to learn, right? You get access to mentorship and stuff like that. So I'm not going to talk any more about that, but we can talk about it in the questions. By the way, we're a super small group, so at any time, if something I say triggers a thought or a question, we can do questions at the end, but just shout it out. So, because there's like a different level of understanding I expect, I'm kind of starting at a very basic level. And so, if I'm going too slow or too fast, let me know. But so, what is venture capital, right? I use that word a lot. People like Donovan who basically put money into a company in return for a percentage of ownership of that company. And you know, there's a lot of variations, but that's the basic idea. They're basically buying a part of your company. They make money when the company gets sold or goes IPO. And that business is a business about making money, so they're going to, sooner or later, you're going to want to do that. A lot of companies don't fit this model, and again, that's totally okay. In fact, it's great. So I've done both. I've done venture capital and I've done non-venture capital, and they're just different. It's not right or wrong. They're just different. But if you're going to go down the venture capital route, again, there's a math behind how the venture capital industry works, but they need certain kind of outcomes for their equations to make sense. And if you don't have sort of a path to 100 million in revenue, I mean, you have to have it. It just means you got to be able to see how that could happen. Then you're probably not a fit for venture capital. If you haven't figured out product market fit yet, you're probably not ready for venture capital. It's great for high growth markets. It's something like Uber, for example, where there's a lot of competition, the market's growing really rapidly, you need a lot of capital, that's when venture capital makes sense. And again, sooner or later, you're going to have to sell your company. Doesn't mean it could be 20 years, but so, for example, my bookship app, I don't ever want to sell that. I want to do that for the rest of my life if I can. Venture capital would be a bad choice for me for a number of reasons, but in particular because I don't want to sell the company. So just pros and cons about that. I mean, the pro of venture capital is you have money. You can pay yourself a salary, you can hire people, you can do marketing, you can do all the great things you can do if you have money. And there are some companies, it's the only way to build them. If you're building a new, solar panel company and you have a lot of capital investment required for manufacturing, you're probably going to need venture capital. Sometimes you have to do it this way. You get access to a board, you get access to investors, people like Donovan who have a wealth of experience you can leverage. It's instant credibility when you tell people you took a round of venture capital financing, it's like, oh, there must be something there. And maybe there isn't, maybe there isn't, but you get that credibility. It's great for public relations. You get news articles, if you go on TechCrunch or any of those things, that's all they write about is companies that got venture capital funding. It's like there's this whole universe of companies that don't exist for everybody. That's all they write about. And one actually very underappreciated benefit of venture capital is, and I live this, if you lose the money, you don't have to pay it back. And it's an underappreciated benefit of venture capital because that's the model. They're I don't want to say gambling, but they are they're putting money in with the expectation that they're going to get a return on some of those companies and some of them won't. Whereas if you fill up your credit card with $50,000 worth of credit card debt, you kind of have to pay it back. There are some cons. You don't own the company and you don't own the revenue. You're in a venture capital company and a customer walks up and says, here's a $20,000 check for your product. You can't put that money in your pocket and go buy groceries with it. You have to put it in the company and use it for company purposes. That can be a big disadvantage. You're going to have bosses. So in fact, in Gobi, I had two investors. As I said, I'm still very good friends with both of them, but they had diametrically opposed ideas about what I needed to do in the business. One of them said, you need to figure out a path to revenue as quickly as you can. He wanted me to hire a VP of sales and do all this selling stuff. The other one said, revenue doesn't matter, you need user growth. You need to get as many users as you can, and you need to do all this stuff. And so every board meeting, once a quarter, I had this conflict, which I couldn't resolve, which is they had two totally different viewpoints about what was important. And so I spent 2 or 3 years of my life trying to make both of them happen, and mostly failing. So you do get people who are going to have a strong point of view about your business. So if you do ever get to a place where you're taking venture capital, you want to choose wisely. They can fire you. I haven't had that experience yet, but it does happen. And you're on the treadmill. Like every quarter, there's a board meeting, and what have you done in the last 3 months, and what are you doing the next 3 months? Like it's a treadmill. You can't get off it. If you fund your own business and you decide you want to take 3 weeks off because you need to, go right ahead. So, actually, before I'm going to leave venture capital and then come back. Are there any questions about that? I'm always worried when there's no questions. Yeah.
I don't know how to articulate this question, but one of the things I had in one of the starting classes I took about VC funding is this layer of equity spreading, I guess. Like, so let's say the first person comes in, the first VC, they get a certain percentage, but then their percentage starts to dwindle as other people come in. Is that, am I getting that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, so if I own 100% of my company and I go to Steve, and Steve is a venture capitalist and he invests, he'll end up with some percentage of the company. So let's say he buys 40% of the company. So now I only have 60% of my company.
Right.
Now
what about his share, though? More people come in after that?
So if I then do another round of financing, and this is called dilution, that's the term for that. So yeah, if you do another round of financing, people will come in, and basically everyone will get diluted, and they will own, as a percentage, they'll own less of the company. Now, that's not all bad news, because if you're doing another round of funding, it means you're being successful, which means the value of your company is getting bigger. And so you may own a smaller percentage of a larger piece. So, I mean, go back right here, I'll just talk about Endeca for a minute. So the company was sold for $1 billion, and the CEO owned probably, at the exit, he probably owned 20% of that. So he started from 100%. He was a good negotiator. But you know, your average employee had like fractions of a fraction of a fraction of a percent. And so, I mean, that company we did 6 rounds of financing. So diluted. But when I joined, the company was valued at, I don't know, $10 million. And at the end, it's $1 billion. So the top line's going up as well as the bottom line. So it's kind of I feel like it's easy to get too concerned about dilution. As long as your company's succeeding and getting more and more valuable, life will be good for you.
So I think that's the biggest thing, like, you know, I think especially when it's your company, your baby, and you start to see like 100% start to, you know, that to me that has a psychological effect, you know. And you don't feel like you have control of your company, you know, because you don't.
It's when you take venture capital, you're basically trading control for dollars. I mean, it's that simple. You're trading control for dollars. You're going to have less control, but you're going to have more dollars. And that requires a mindset that that's okay. And again, there's some companies it's the only way you can build them. You have too much capital requirements. You need too many people or too much raw materials. And sometimes it's the only way. But there are most companies, in fact, it's not the only way. So it's just a question of what's the right path. But yeah, I think people worry a little bit too much about, am I getting diluted, how much? You know, the real question is, are you making the pie bigger and bigger and bigger? And that's the venture capital game. You need to make the pie bigger and bigger and bigger.
Mark, I have a question. So I've heard talk about like having a messy cap table. You have too many equity owners in the company. But is there a way to structure your company so you can have a lot of people that benefit from an exit without having to have lots of people working with that?
Yeah. So what I would say, and Donovan may have some good context too, but as an investor, I think typically they're not worried about how many people that are on the cap table that are employees. Like they want the employees on the cap table, right? They want people, by on the cap table we mean people who own shares in the company. I mean, you want employees to have that because they're going to work that much harder and motivated, and that's how people think. I think when you run into problems with the cap table, it's when there's either too many other investors or people outside the company that maybe don't have a current vested interest in the company but still own stock. I think that's more when the cap table gets to be a problem. So the company I was on board of, I mean, 3/4 of the people who were on the cap table weren't in the company, and it wasn't a problem. So as long as it's people inside the company, it's all good. That'd be my answer. I think having multiple investors can be a challenge. I mean, there's usually I sort of drew this picture sort of straight from idea to venture capital, but there's a lot of times there's paths in between. Maybe I took friends and family investment, then I took angel investment, then I took an incubator investment. And by the time the venture capitalist per se comes along, there's already been 3 or 4 different sets of people who've invested in the company, and they can just be concerned about control. Because again, they're putting a lot of money in, they want to have influence. But again, I put that in the category of good problems to have. Any last questions about venture capital? Once, going twice? So let's talk about, I like to call it indie. Most people call it bootstrapping, but I like indie. It feels better to me. It's like indie bookstores, indie coffee shops, indie companies. It feels better to me. But the common denominator is you're funding this out of your pocket. You're either paying yourself a salary or you're not paying yourself a salary. You're paying for the marketing expenses. You're paying for all that yourself. The pros are sort of obvious. It's all yours. If that customer walks up with a $20,000 check, you can go pay your rent. You can go pay your groceries. It's your money. It's not the company's money. You may not want to do that if you want to keep the company going, but you have an option. And you're your own boss, and that's good and bad. Being your own boss can be great. It can be terrifying, sort of depending on how you are. You got control. The cons are equally obvious. Like you don't have money. There's never enough money. There's never enough people. It's a good question to ask yourself, how long can you go without a salary? If the answer is not 2 years, think hard, because it may be 2 years before you have enough revenue to actually support yourself. It's a good, when you're starting a company, you look yourself in the mirror. It's like starting a restaurant, right? What's the payoff time to a restaurant? It's usually like 3 years, right, before a restaurant actually makes money. you're starting a restaurant, you've got to be able to survive for 3 years before your restaurant works. Same thing with a startup. You may not have to last that long, but you should be prepared. I think the other thing that's missing is a lot of times is you don't have access to mentorship and guidance, especially if you're a first-time entrepreneur. There's other ways to get that. I mean, there's organizations like this. Most successful people, honestly, if you're genuine and you ask for help, they'll help you. That's always been my experience. And you can build some amazing companies like that. Anybody ever heard of a company called Craigslist? Completely bootstrapped. I think Craig Newmark owns all of it. I don't know, who knows what it's worth, but it's in the billions. Anybody know Spanx? 400 million a year in revenue. Sarah Blakely owns 100% of it. Completely bootstrapped, no venture capital. It's possible. It's hard, but it's possible. If you're in this bootstrap business, where else can you get money besides venture capital? So I'll say revenue is freedom. If you have customer revenue, that is the ultimate in power. If you've got revenue coming in, you control your own destiny, you can do what you want. So there are all these other great sources, but I would always be thinking about how can I start to generate revenue from this. But the classic ways to fund yourself when you're bootstrapping a company is to have a day job. Like I have my day job, and then nights and weekends I work on my project until it gets to a certain place. And consult, which is sort of a variation of that. Incubators and accelerators will often come with enough money to sort of help you survive. Crowdfunding is an option. I ran a very unsuccessful Kickstarter campaign for my company a while back. I learned a ton, but I didn't actually end up getting any money, but that's a route and it works for people. I think grants are actually overlooked a lot. So there's SBIR grants if you have any kind of an interesting sort of IP, like it's an interesting possibility. There are a lot of foundations that give grants for social enterprises in particular. If you start to generate some revenue, there's kind of a new breed of venture capital called, it's typically called revenue-based investing, but basically they do venture capital investing, but what they get in return for their money is a percentage of your future revenues. And so typically this kind of investing is much more friendly to smaller companies. If you've got a company that has a potential for 10 million a year in revenue, you never get venture capital, but this kind of venture capital you might have access to. Friends and family you know about, loans and credit cards, not great, but you got to do what you got to do. So let's talk about social venture a little bit. I'll caveat this. I'll double caveat this. I know less about this than I know about the other stuff, but they go by a lot of different names: impact investor, social venture. But they're investing in companies that have a social mission, and they're going to want some kind of an economic model to that company. But that's only one of the considerations. Where classic venture capital is going to be sort of 100% focused on what's your path to revenue. Social venture is much more interested in what kind of impact you have on the community, on the environment, whatever it may be. But again, you're still going to need that sort of product market fit, right? The key word here is quantifiable. You have quantifiable social impact. And so even if you're doing what you think of as a social initiative, you want to be thinking about what metrics can I develop that demonstrate that this is working to people. It's just so important. Like that word metric can't be used often enough. It's so easy to convince yourself that you have something. You want that evidence. They do invest in both for-profit and non-profit companies, so you can be a non-profit and still take social venture capital. That's a path. So again, this is for companies that have a clear social mission. But again, like be thinking about product market fit. Do I have evidence that people actually want my product? That's really important. And there's some local examples of this here. I mean, so Elemental Accelerator, I would call it classic in this model, and maybe our network are sort of here, sort of not here, but that's another example of a social venture investing.
Question.
Yeah.
So besides like Google and like sending out a survey to your friends and family, what's a good way to get metrics?
I'm sorry, a little louder. Couldn't hear
What's a
you.
good way to get metrics besides just like Google and other research?
If you have a digital product, then Google Analytics. Define the metrics of what does it mean for people to use your product. In my case, how many people download my application? How many people use it? How many books do they read? how many people use the product again after the first time, so what's the repeat usage. If your product is more about like a tangible thing that you're let's say selling, then obviously sales. But I think it sort of goes from, the first is conversations, right? If you're selling to, let's say you're selling to banks, and you can get sort of the president of Bank of Hawaii to say, yeah, this is a product that we would buy. That's valuable. So that's a good first step, is people who are your potential market saying they'll buy it, but then you want to have like data that they are actually doing it. Which path is right for you? We have an algorithm for that? We don't have an algorithm for that. It's sort of a few basic questions, honestly. The first question is, why are you doing what you're doing? Like, you want to do this because you want to be a successful and well-known businessman and make lots of money. Venture capital is a great option. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've been on that path. There's nothing wrong with that path. Why are you doing what you're doing? The next question is, what's your market size or revenue? If you've got $1 billion market and $100 million a year in revenue that you can kind of see your way towards and tell a story about, then venture capital might be an option. If you don't, it's probably not the right path. The other thing is, how fast is your market moving? This is one of the reasons why you take venture capital, is the market's moving really quickly. Uber and Lyft are in a dogfight, and I need to take investment because I got to keep up with somebody else. If your market's moving really fast, you may want to think about taking investment. If you're like me, my book club app, like there's not a whole horde of people out there building book club apps, right? So I have time to sort of let that develop organically. The VCs have this thing: do you want to be rich or do you want to be king? You want to be rich means, usually they ask you this question when they're trying to decide whether you should still be the CEO or whether they should be a professional CEO. But if you want to be king, it means you want control. If you want to be rich, it means you're more concerned about the outcome and less concerned about what's your particular goal. But really, I think these are really the most important. Why are you doing what you're doing, and how big is it? I want to talk about emotional resilience. I love this picture so much. I've used this picture in like 5 blog posts because that's how I feel every time I get in the water. Startups are hard. Like, if you're at this for 10 years, it's a grind. And like I said, 8 or 9 of those 10 years are going to suck. It's going to be hard work. You're going to be tired all the time. You're not going to get enough sleep. All that stuff. You got to enjoy it. You got to have a purpose behind why you're doing what you're doing to get you through all of that. You want to do it with people that you enjoy, people that you respect. Dare I say, people that you love. I mean, there's people I work with. Like I said, they feel like part of my family. I've spent so much time with them. And you got to invest in yourself. I had my mentor told me this when I was about 25. He said, 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, don't think about your work. And when he said that, I thought, are you kidding? Like, of course I don't do that. And then I realized, no, actually I was thinking about it pretty much every waking moment. And so you're going to be at it for 10 years, you got to pace yourself. And lastly, I'm a big believer in books you should read. Here's a few of my favorites. A couple of books about product market fit that I think are classics. Traction is about the 20 ways or 18 ways to get customers. The Lean Startup is the classic about sort of not investing a lot of time building things that don't actually advance your cause. As you think about the path, this is actually a relatively recent book. I was actually a reviewer of this book. A friend of mine wrote it. I think it's a really great book for first-time entrepreneurs. It's called How to Have a Happy Hustle. And it's all about bootstrapping and how do you get from I have an idea to I actually have a company. And lastly, that emotional resilience. These are just a couple of books I come back to time and again because they revive me when I need it. Your mileage may vary, but they're both great books that really speak to what it takes to achieve this kind of thing. They're not about startups at all. So. We have 5 minutes for questions. Yeah.
Who are like some of the social venture activities besides the media networking?
Who are some other ones?
Yeah.
Just trying to think who are the ones that come to mind. I don't know that world as well. I mean, so like for the Kauffman Foundation, for example, I don't know if they would really classify as a venture investor, but they spread a lot of money around social enterprises.
There's
Hawaii Investment Bank also, he supplies most.
Yeah. Did you have some?
Yeah. A lot of the quote-unquote impact investors are high net worth individuals or people who are like
Yeah.
partners in other funds. So they have their own social missions, and so a lot of times they'll invest for the value. There's some firms that get set up now because they're seeing ESG being something that increases the viability of the possible success of venture capital investment. So some people are trying to invest in ESG companies and they're out there. Like kind of, send out a list of these vendors.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if I could leave you with anything, it's like work on something that's meaningful, that means something to you, because it's hard. It's too hard to do something that doesn't matter and that doesn't make you get up out of bed in the morning every day to do what you do. And I think statistically, startups are a terrible way to make money. It's a horrible way to make money. If you want to make money, go to Wall Street. Be an investment banker or work in a hedge fund for 10 years. You'll work 18 hours a day for 10 years and you'll be rich. Like it's actually not complicated. It's all you have to do. Just move to New York, work 18 hours a day for 10 years and you can be rich. But no, it's not right. It's not right for me at least. So.
I was kind of curious as to, in your path of your journey, what did you find to be the most challenging experience?
Challenging?
Yeah, or I mean, you're saying that it's really hard. I mean, it sounds like you've got a personal experience that
So
might give us this glimpse.
it's been challenging a couple of different times for different reasons. So at this company, at PTC, it was a 1,000-person company. I had 100 people working for me. 95 of them were Russian PhD mathematicians, and they're the most argumentative, screaming group of people I've ever worked with in my life. And I don't mean this in a negative way because they come from a different culture and they have a different way of communicating. And I thought they were all furious with each other, but that's just how they were. But it was really stressful for me because every meeting was yelling, table pounding and shoe pounding, and it was just I really struggled with it. But I learned everything I did after that, the amount of stuff I learned there. So, sometimes you have to pay for that knowledge somehow. Gobi was challenging because we had some success. I mean, we had 1 million users, Wall Street Journal article, TechCrunch article, all the trappings of success except for a successful business. And that was stressful for me because I didn't know how I was going to pay my friends. I mean, I had these people I work with, they're part of my family. And it was just like we were running out of money, and I could see the end. It was just super painful that way. But I'm great friends with all of them. I stayed great friends with the investors. I learned a lot, and so I wouldn't call it a failure. It was just not a success. So, I mean, I've had the work 14 hours a day, 6 days a week for years at a time. But I was always doing it on things that I loved. So for me, that wasn't as much of a burden as you might think.
So what problem are you solving with the book shows?
I'm trying to get more people reading books, honestly. Like in the end, that's really what it boils down to. I'm trying to get more people reading books. I read a book with my son before the app, and I just had a really great experience. Like he was in Chicago, I was here, and it kept us in touch. And then I did the same thing with my daughter. It's just like I was really building my relationship with him. And after the second time, I thought, well, maybe I can kind of bottle all that up and build an app that people can get more out of the reading. So and I'm just passionate about books. I've been passionate about books forever. So if I can get more people reading, then life's good. So, yeah.
There's a lot of startups out there, but only very few of them kind of come out and be successful.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the aspects that you feel that many of the companies fail to do to kind of make it out?
Before I answer that, let me answer about the companies that are wildly successful. And I've talked to the founders of a bunch of those companies, and a lot of times, especially like the consumer companies, they have no idea why they succeed. Honestly, you talk to people, it's like making a movie. You can make the best movie in the world. Are people going to love that movie? It's hard to know. And so a lot of times they don't know. Like you talk to some of those people, they don't actually know really why it worked. But there's a lot. Not succeeding, I think, is you fall in love with your idea, you love your idea, and you don't pay attention to the data. Like if people aren't, so in my case, right, if people aren't using my product, I can love the idea as much as I want, but if they're not using it, I have to be open to that and sort of realize that, maybe I'm not going about this the right way. The mission might be right, but my solution might be wrong, and maybe I should do something different. So I think that's the first way is like listen to the data. First of all, you got to get data, and then you have to listen to it, and that's hard. If it's your own idea, you love it, you know, it's your baby. It's hard to listen to data that says nobody wants your baby. You know, they call that your baby is ugly syndrome. You got to be open to that. But yeah, so get data. That's the first thing, is just get data and then pay attention to it and act on it. All right, I'm happy to talk more later, but I'm getting the red flag.